social work student at Carleton University, and I'll be your MC for tonight. The topic of domestic violence, partner abuse, violence against women and men, child and spousal abuse, sexual assault, spiritual abuse, and abuse in general is a topic that is taboo and not talked about much. This topic is even more avoided within the Muslim community. Though such a topic has been addressed on pulpits during Muharram and Ramadan, for example, we'd like to see more collaborations between Islamic scholars and professionals in order to help provide and support the community. The last few years, different mental health initiatives, such as the Serenity Islamic Mental Health Awareness in Ottawa, have tackled many of these much avoided difficult discussions to help bring awareness and to encourage those who lack the help they need and to start that conversation. Now this evening, we're pleased to hold this panel discussion on the topic of domestic violence and abuse in the Muslim community, exploring it from an Islamic, psychotherapeutic, and a social perspective. Now before we begin, we'd like to remind you all that we do acknowledge that it is a sensitive topic that may trigger some of you, and that this is a safe space. If you need a moment, you can let us know if you need to leave the room. We have a psychotherapist and a social worker on site if need be. If you are just leaving the room for any other reason, just give us a thumbs up or a nod or something like that. Otherwise, we will follow you outside the room to make sure everything is okay. Now, although this is a sensitive topic, it is an important one that our community needs to discuss openly. Now, we hope by the end of tonight's program, you'll be able to take away more information on how abuse impacts our society from the children, women, and men, and how to help break the cycle of abuse. Thank you. Tonight, we're blessed to have Brother Wa'il Zian, Sister Fayrouz Karmali, and Brother Hussein to help us explore this topic. And we also have resources available in the back of the room, as well as the refreshments. Brother Wa'il Zian is a prolific Islamic speaker who has studied Hawza in the city of Windsor beginning 12 years ago. He worked on several programs independently, such as Differences of the Islamic Schools of Thought, and has studied the majority of books which dissect such topics. He also worked on studying books of theology, the faith of Shia Islam, under the guidance of several scholars. Well spoken in both English and Arabic, he has lectured in local and international universities, as well as within the Muslim community on a variety of topics relevant to youth and as well as the social issues they face. Brother Wa'il is also very active in mentoring and guiding youth, as well as supporting and guiding families and couples within the community. And currently he's working on a thesis in a basic introductory of the sciences of Aqidah. Now to present to one of his teachers, which will make him eligible for degree completion from Al-Mustafa University, which is the Hawza of Qom. Welcome, Brother Wa'il. Fayrouz Karmali has a bachelor in honors psychology and a minor in aging studies, and she's completed her master's in social work and has a certificate in addictions at the University of Central Florida. She's currently working at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board in both high schools and elementary schools as a social worker. Fayrouz works with staff, students, and families to provide the necessary interventions, which include advocacy, referrals to community services, threats and risk assessment, as well as counseling. Welcome, Sister Fayrouz. Barak Hussein is an international student counselor at the Health and Counseling Services at Carleton University. She has a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in educational counseling from the University of Ottawa. She has been counseling students for 9 years now and has been at the Health and Counseling Services counseling students from all sorts of backgrounds through various mental health related issues. She's also a passionate mental health advocate through the Muslim Counselor, is active in speaking locally and internationally, as she aims to bring more awareness to the topic of mental health within Muslim communities. Welcome, Sister Brah, the organizer herself. Now that you're familiar with these our esteemed panelists, we will begin our panel discussion. Just as a reminder, tonight's topic is domestic violence and abuse in the Muslim community. Now, to start us off, we'll have each panelist talk for 5 minutes about abuse from their professional perspectives, and we'll have a discussion afterwards. So, I guess we'll start off with Brother Wa'il. The first question, actually before we can sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Beautiful. So, Brother Wa'il, the first question that I have on my list is, what is abuse and how is it defined according to your respective field?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Sorry, louder.
No microphone today.
I guess I'm going to show you my abusive side. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. Peace and blessings be upon you all. First of all, thanks for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here before you. And I hope I'll be able to deliver, inshallah, accordingly. As to my personal field and throughout my career, first of all, the Islamic religion defines abuse almost like any other field when it comes to the whole concept of abuse. It's basically any act causing harm committed or directed towards one person or a group of people, or the vice versa, meaning a group of people towards one person or a group of people towards another group of people. And that act will cause the human being or a person to basically stop being a productive individual within the society. Moreover, the Islamic perspective takes the concept of abuse to a higher level, meaning abuse is not only towards human beings. You would notice within the jurisprudential laws, the Islamic perspective speaks about abuse about even belongings, even your own materialistic aspects, abuse towards animals, abuse towards property, be it property, public property, or even private property. That also falls under the category of abuse. For instance, you will notice that one of the main jurisprudential laws is that a land that you own and you do not cultivate, Islam considers that as a form of abuse to the land. Or even a pet or any type of animal that you own that you do not use properly is considered a form of abuse towards the animal. Now mainly I know the topic tonight is what we're talking about directed more towards abuse. You will notice that also the religion of Islam does not only tackle the issue of physical abuse or even emotional abuse. The religion of Islam even goes back to the roots of the problem, and it gives us rules of conduct of how to deal with each other and warns us from what is abuse and what is not. For instance, if I may take a bit more of your time, about 2 minutes if I still have, I think so, yes. If you would notice in Surah Al-Hujurat, in the Holy Quran, Surah number 49, verse number 11, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the way that we should deal with each other in the society or in the community, where He directs His speech by saying, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, la yaskhar qawmun min qawmin, asa an yakunu khayran minhum. Right? All you who have faith, let not people ridicule another people. So basically the religion of Islam is talking here about the verbal abuse. And you would notice that that's exactly what is the first stage of abuse. Bullying, that's how it starts. It always starts by casting names and throwing names and calling each other nicknames, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first thing He tackles about the core of the problem. Said, let not any people ridicule another people. It may be that they are better than they are, right? Because the religion of Islam is telling us that sometimes you might be ridiculing another person, yet in reality they might be even better than you are, right? وَلَا قَوْمٌ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُونَ خَيْرًا مِنْهُمْ وَلَا نِسَاءٌ مِّن نِسَاءٍ عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهُنَّ. Nor let women ridicule women. It may be that they are better than they are, even more specifically speaking about be it male or female. وَلَا تَلْمِزُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. And do not defame one another. And that's another point. The whole concept of lems, believe it or not, is basically speaking about another person's main issues or main negative habits publicly by saying, oh, this person does that. And that's also a form of bullying. It's a form of abuse. You realize that. That even if it was in a joking matter, because mockery, in this case, it is not permissible, right? And you will notice that he goes on further by saying, and I'm sorry, I just want to make one very fast point. وَلَا تَلْمِزُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. And do not defame one another. You see, the main exact translation for this is that do not defame yourself. One of the commentators of the Holy Quran makes a beautiful point here. He says the Quran used the term أنفسكم, yourselves. Why? Simply to show you that any other human being in the society is considered yourself. He or she, they have a nafs just like you do. So whatever you're defaming them, you're basically defaming yourself on the other hand, right? And then therefore, وَلَا تَلْمِزُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَلَا تَنَابَزُوا بِالْأَلْقَابِ. And do not defame one another, nor insult one another by calling nicknames. Do not even call one another nicknames, right? بِئْسَ الْإِسْمُ الْفُسُوقُ بَعْدَ الْإِيمَانِ. How evil are profane names. Imagine that the religion of Islam is going that specific when it comes to the whole notion of verbal abuse. Simply why? Because basically this is the first level of taking that whole concept of abuse to another level.
It first starts verbal, and then and then develops into physical. And if you would notice, I'm sure the respected sisters know more than I do in this field, but even when it comes to the whole notion of bullying, it always starts by calling nicknames, defaming one another. Alhamdulillah, thanks again to social media nowadays, that the whole world can know about it, right? You realize on YouTube and Facebook, you see many videos about people ridiculing others, be it in school, on the street, in the work, or everywhere else, and then the whole world knows about it now. And then it always starts like this, and then it becomes a sense of physical abuse. Why? And not only from the victor or the person who is the initiator, but even from the victim himself. The religion of Islam acknowledges this. As human beings, sometimes we're emotional, and not everyone is good with their tongues. So what happens in this case, unfortunately, and this is where sometimes the religion of Islam clashes with the system, because the system considers the victim a victor when he or she reacts physically. But not everyone is on the level to be able to absorb verbal and emotional abuse. Hence, some people can only know how to react physically, right? Now the religion of Islam wants us to prevent this from happening on both levels. And therefore Allah says, بِئْسَ الْإِسْمُ الْفُسُوقُ بَعْدَ الْإِيمَانِ. How evil are profane names subsequent to faith. Meaning what? A person, he or she, who have and possess faith, do not call such names. Do not start by that level of abuse. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَتُبْ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ. Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues by saying, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَتُبْ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. And whoever is not penitent. Meaning what? Is that if a person goes through those stages, or a person starts engaging in such an act, he or she are supposed to repent to Allah. And if they do not, Allah calls them that these are the ones who are the wrongdoers. So all the characteristics and all the acts that you see on top, the beginning of the verse to the end, these are acts of wrong. These are acts that are considered illicit within the religion of Islam. And thank you very much, inshallah. Now, I don't take much of your time.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So I guess I'll restate the question just in case anyone forgot. I'd like to add a second layer to it. So for the first question, A, what is abuse and how is it defined according to your respective field? And B, how does it affect one's mental health? Just to articulate.
So in the context that we have tonight, domestic abuse and violence, before we begin, I'd like to honor this gathering today in commemoration of a very important lady in our direction in our life, Lady Fatima, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, where we're commemorating her passing. And the theme of that, the way that she died, was violence against her as a woman in her society, and how this could reflect in our society today. So I want to commemorate our gathering today in her honor for her. So just do a loud salawat in her honor.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So from a psychotherapeutic perspective, domestic violence, also known as domestic abuse or family violence, it's a pattern of behavior which involves violence or abuse by one person against another in a domestic setting, so in a marriage or cohabitation. To take that further, the Canadian Mental Health Association describes it by violence meaning intentional action or inaction causing physical, sexual, and psychological injury, including battering. So this is physical, psychological, sexual abuse, and destruction of a person's property. This can also be through pornography, sexual assault, incest, child abuse, sexual harassment. So, like we said, these are very sensitive topics that we're exploring today, and they all fall under that. And we need to really understand what does that mean, because you hear the word domestic violence or domestic abuse, but sometimes we forget or don't know the layers that are involved. So this could include, in a work setting where it could be co-workers, colleagues, employees, students. And so through the Canadian Mental Health Association, their statistics show that men are the predominant perpetrators of the violence, and the women and children are the predominant victims. And so many of the abusers have been victims of violence themselves. Now, this is not to say that men themselves have not been the victims of abuse within the home and outside as well, because we know this is the case as well. So like we said, abuse is in the form of psychological, mental, physical, financial, as well as spiritual. how does this affect a person's overall well-being? Of course, from if you were a child living in a home where you were seeing the mother disrespect and bully and hurt the father, if you're a young man seeing this, how is this going to affect the overall scheme or world view and thinking of this young man as he grows up? Flip it the other side, a young woman seeing her mother disrespect her father, that can also affect her worldview as she grows up in terms of disrespecting men and having a superiority complex or whatever it may be. If we look at it from the other side, when, let's say, the father is hurting and abusing the mother, this can also affect the gender, depending of the child as they grow up in such an environment, their worldview and how they interact with the people around them, whether the peers at school, they get into the age of getting to know the opposite gender and finally getting into relationships, and how that can affect them in that avenue, because they grow up in that modeled environment of what they know as this is how it should be. And so this is how you create the cycle of abuse. And that's really hard to break, because a lot of young people growing up thinking this is the way it should be, and they will continue this behavior. Some will realize and recognize that what they are doing is wrong. They know that it's wrong, yet they will still engage in this behavior because it's been a modeled behavior. And it's hard to break that. I have clients that come in and talk about, I was sexually abused when I was a child, but I continued this behavior because I did not know that this was sexual abuse. I thought you were supposed to do this. It's okay to do this. But I don't want to do this anymore because I realized that it's wrong. But this was the modeled behavior that they were introduced to. And so that can also be applied to physical as well as verbal. And so just like Brother Wadi was saying, it starts off with that verbal, name calling, and it could be teasing, then it builds up, of course, with resentment and anger. People start expressing their frustration, and as young children growing up in that type of environment, they don't know how else to express it, perhaps just through anger and hitting, as you can see that on the playground and through bullying. When we talk about financial abuse, what's that all about in a relationship? Well, one partner could be holding or is in charge of the finances at home and will not allow the other partner to use their money as they would like. They know their credit card information. Oh, did you spend $2 at Tim Hortons the other day? Really? So it could be something small like that to no, you are not allowed to use this money to buy your own items that you would like. So things like that. I'm going to take your money and use it to pay off the mortgage. Or, we want to go on a trip. You can pay for half of that, and I'll use my credit card and you can pay me back monthly, kind of thing. And so to keep the dynamics of the family, the victim or the person at the other end of the power dynamic will agree to keep the peace. And so the cycle will continue again and again that way. And so people often ask other people, how are you in such a relationship? You are such a strong guy. You're such a man. How could you let your wife bully you this way? Or to the other woman, or to the woman who is known to be strong, or you wouldn't think she would be in such a relationship. How are you in such a relationship? And so it's not that easy, because obviously you don't go into a relationship thinking, I'm going to marry an abuser. But it happens over time and it develops. And so the person at the other end, the victim, so to speak, I like to call them survivors, when they're no longer there. It's more empowering. But the person who is being abused during that time frame, they slowly become isolated. We talk about the effects on your mental health and overall well-being. They become isolated because the abuser doesn't want them to interact with people around them. They slowly lose their independence, their sense of identity, how they contribute to society, because they are now in the role of pleasing the abuser, as to not to wreak havoc and get their wrath upon them. Again, it's a bit by bit, step by step, until the person no longer recognizes themselves and the family and friends no longer recognize this person as who they once knew before. And so it's almost like a domino effect when it comes to this type. Now, within our community, let's not joke and kid ourselves. It exists. It exists in the greater Canadian community, and it also exists within our own community, but we do not talk about it because it is shameful. We do not want people to know our dirty laundry. We don't want people to know we're in such a relationship. How many couples do we know who show the perfect, cover on the outside? They've got the house, they've got the cars, they've got the jobs, they've got the kids, perfect image on the outside. Yet when the doors are closed, There are bruises, emotional as well as physical bruises. And we can't see that outside unless you can pick up on the signs. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So, sister, sorry, I was going to pose a question once more,
Go for it.
just in case.
Sure.
So, for you, in your case, what is abuse and how is it defined according to your respected field, and how does it affect one's mental health?
So social workers typically focus on what we call vulnerable populations. And by vulnerable populations, we mean populations that either don't have the capacity or are, don't have the capacity to necessarily protect themselves, right? So when you think about that, what are some populations you can think of who might easily be taken advantage of? Who comes to mind? Yeah? Children, absolutely. And then on the other spectrum, there's a lollipop for you here later. I'm not going to throw it out at you right now, but I've got you. So on the other side of the spectrum, where you have children on one side, who do you have on the other side?
Parents?
Yes, there is. Yeah, so the elderly. Yeah, so elder abuse. And elder abuse is something that we're hearing about a lot in the media right now, especially with what's going on in nursing homes and that kind of thing. And so there's also violence against women, right? Domestic violence. Domestic violence within social work is more about adult relationships, right? But then child abuse is how we look and focus more on children and youth, and elder abuse is more how we would look at the elderly. Within these, there's physical abuse, psychological or emotional, sexual abuse, and then we also talk about neglect. So when you hear the word neglect, what comes to mind? If there's a child, what is that child's right?
So somebody whose basic needs are not met.
Basic needs are not being met. So what's a basic need? If you have a child, what needs do you have to meet at first?
Food, clothing, love.
Like food, clothing, love, right? And then if you're denying them love, right, food and clothing, just like Sister Barak was saying, this is where the domino effect comes in, right? Because isn't that also emotional abuse? Right? Because then it's impacting their emotion. It's impacting them psychologically as well, right? Emotional abuse is the one that can be very, very hard to recognize, right? How could we be emotionally abusing our elderly? Can somebody give me an example of that?
Ignoring them?
Exactly, right? Or only visiting them when you want something, right? And what might you want from your elder parent? Money, exactly. So financial abuse, we see that a lot of the elderly, right? Threatening somebody comes under the umbrella of abuse, hurting their feelings, ridiculing them, belittling them, whether it's a child, whether it's between two adults, whether it's between somebody who's older than you and yourself, right? So when you experience these things, right, anything we experience is going to trigger us to feel a certain way, right? So let's imagine that somebody called you a name. Not just like, a simple name, but let's say very hurtful. I don't want to call you a hurtful name, so I'm not just going to throw that out there. But let's say somebody called you a hurtful name again and again and again. And let's say this is somebody in your life who's supposed to love you, right? How is that going to make you feel? Can you guys toss out some words? How would you feel?
I don't know, like I was thinking about another thought, so
Yeah.
if you can...
I'll come back? Sure.
Yeah.
How would you feel if somebody was
Not good enough, I guess.
okay? So you would feel worthless?
Yeah.
Maybe? Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Demoralized.
Demoralized. What else? Yeah,
Maybe isolated as well.
for sure. Would there be anger? Would there be sadness? Right? Would you feel trapped? Helpless? Potentially? Rejected? Right? Especially if these are the people who are supposed to love you the most in the world, right? Regardless of if you're the parent or you're the child or you're the spouse. And what we also know is that our feelings are connected to our behaviors, right? And so if you have these feelings within you, how are you going to manifest them? Whether you're a child or an adult, how would you manifest? What will come out of you if you're having these feelings? What do you think? If you're angry, what might come out of you? Retaliation. And you could retaliate physically, correct? Right? you could retaliate verbally, right? If you're a child, you could retaliate physically, right? And Sister Brock was talking about a playground type incidents, the hitting, the trashing of the classroom, which we do see, right? Might you try running away? You might, right? In the school system, it's not unheard of where a child is now turning 16 and they know that within Ontario law, they don't have to live at home anymore. They know that if their parent calls the police and says, my child did not come home, if the child is 16, they're allowed to be wherever they want to be legally, right? And if that child can prove that there is maltreatment at home, they will receive some financial compensation if they're attending school. It's no secret, all of our kids know this, right? And so we see them sometimes move out of the home, and it's not easy to move out of the home when you're 16 and still need to be going to school, right? You might hurt somebody else if you have these feelings, but you might also hurt
yourself,
right? And that's how we see sometimes we've had other forums, thanks to Sister Barak, about self-harm, about suicide, right? So you might see somebody who's actually displaying suicidal behaviors, suicidal thoughts, just because the pain and those feelings become so intense, right? But I really like what Sister Barak said about surviving and thriving. Because I like to focus on sometimes the good news, right? The good news is that if we can stop these things, right? Or if we can remove ourselves from the situations, if we can change the patterns of behavior, not only can we survive, but we can then thrive. We can grow, we can mature, and the word we use for that is resiliency. So you'll see that some people will go through these traumatic events in their lives. They'll be severely impacted, right? And they won't be able to leave their room in the morning, right? But there are some people who will say, you know what? In spite of this, I'm going to give it my all today. Not only am I going to give it my all, but I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be a positive force in the world. So while it's true that some people can be severely negatively impacted for a long time, it's also true that if it stops, if you do the work maybe that you need to go through, right, to resolve this within you, to resolve what's happened, and that work can be done in the way that is the best fit for the person, right? So whether that's you're talking to God about it, whether you're talking to a counselor about it, whether you're joining a support group about it, the means will differ from person to person. You might even do a combination, right? But then you come out of that stronger, and you come out of that a thriver. So that's kind of the hope.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So now moving forward with our second question, starting off with Brother Wide once again. What are the most prevalent issues around abuse that you encounter? Digging deep.
Well, what I would say is that, you see, the most common one that I personally, because of my field, that when I travel around and I attend many places, like, for example, like Sister Barak said, is that the highlighted events for the Muslim community is the month of Ramadan, the month of Muharram. And this is unfortunate, believe it or not. It's really unfortunate. And sorry, just going back a bit, mainly to the topic of abuse, a lot of people come and say, well, Islam doesn't tackle this topic enough, or the Muslim world doesn't really tackle this topic enough. And when you ask the person that are speaking, or maybe it's not being focused, maybe there's not enough workshops, and obviously we're going to be speaking about that later on. But just one thing is that, do you attend religious events? They always say no. Well, maybe if you do attend religious events, then you'll understand. That there isn't a time that I have lecture, be it during the month of Ramadan, the month of Muharram, or even within these nights, the Fatimiyya nights, according to certain group of schools of thought within the religion of Islam, that we do not bring the topic of relationships, marriage, upraising a child, or raising a family, or a healthy family. And there's many lectures, and I really invite a lot of the people. There are many lectures that are available online about that. Mainly if you go on this website called alsiraj.net, there's a phenomenal scholar by the name of Sheikh Habib al-Qadhi,
who was one of the most noted students of Ayatollah Bahjat. May Allah bless his soul. And he has a whole basically workshop that he talks about how to achieve a happy family, starting before even getting to know the person that you want to get married to, until you have children. So basically, a lot of them are available. There are many books available. It's just sometimes it's unfortunate is that you speak to many victims and they always like to blame religion. They'll say, oh, well, religion is wrong, they don't give me my rights. Well, did you resort to religion before even stepping into a relationship? As a I wouldn't like to refer to myself as a scholar, or as a speaker that gets invited to many nikah commemorations. How many of us has been to what we call it Kadbiktat, right? You go to an engagement party. It's always that the scholar gets invited just to recite those two words, right? Okay, yeah, listen, you guys are married, and okay, Maulana. And then everyone starts staring at the Maulana that they can't wait until he leaves so the haram can start, right? Because they don't want him present. They just can't wait until he leaves. They just want him out as soon as possible, simply so then they start with whatever they want to engage to. Well, fine. And then that same Maulana gets called 10 years later, we want a divorce. Who are you over these people? Why do you want a divorce? You're not giving me my rights. Islam doesn't give me my right. This is not fair. All scholars are corrupted. Okay, good. Did you ever try to go get a divorce at the city hall? By the way, if you go right now, even within the Canadian system, you go try to get a divorce at the city hall. You know how long it takes? Average.
1 year. A year
I'm
for
sorry?
separation.
Exactly 1 year for separation, not even an official divorce. Why do you think that the Western system added this whole notion of separation? Because statistically speaking, no country in the world wants to be known as a country that contains a high rate of divorce, because this is not good. So it's something logical. Yes, the religion of Islam wants to make divorce hard, but not in certain cases, of course. When your life is under threat, then no. There are certain cases, obviously we'll be tackling them later on. I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions about that. We'll talk about them more in details. But yes, divorce, resorting to divorce as the first thing that, no, we don't want that to happen right away, especially if the problem is very simple. And believe it or not, in my career, I've acquired cases that I got a call from a father that wanted his daughter to get divorced because his son-in-law cannot afford a Michael Kors purse. And I kid you not. And that happens a lot, by the way. Or simply because, trust me, there are many silly reasons that we can encounter. I'm sure a lot of us would hear about them in the community. But mainly the first, if I want to go to the question that the brother addressed, is that the most common issues that I face is that number one, relationship abuse. Be it engagement or even within marriage, relationship abuse. These are the top priority. These are the most cases that I deal with when I travel around, when I lecture. And by the way, when I talk about relationship abuse, you'd be amazed how a lot of men are abused too. You would be shocked when you get to know the crust of the relationship. Yes, psychologically speaking, men have a hard time admitting it. You're not going to find one man going up to his friend or even his bestest friend admitting to him that he gets beat at home. I get a beating at home. My wife beats me up or my wife slaps me on the face. And by the way, when we talk about abuse, sometimes, yes, there are men that are being abused, not necessarily from their wives. From their wives' brothers, family members, being threatened day and night that if you do this, my father, my brothers are going to deal with you. In certain communities, some of them get beat, some of them get tortured, some of them even get forced to divorce when there isn't an issue to the problem. You know what I mean? Some of them no. Believe it or not, I've dealt with cases where wives have threatened their own husbands with their previous partners. So there's a lot of, and obviously I get, yes, Brother Hassan is really laughing about that.
Shock, like the
Yes,
shock.
yes, they're being threatened with their previous partners. That, you know what? Or they're being bullied with their previous partners. And if you're going to give me this, if I don't get this from you, then you know what? My previous partner used to provide me with that. So I can go back to him or her in certain cases. Some women are being totally abused, being stripped away from their simplest religious and logical rights that Allah Himself provided them with, and yes, we deal with that a lot. So when it comes to relationship abuse, in my experience, I'm sure someone else can have a different experience. In my experience, I've dealt with them. It's almost an equal number of both partners abusing each other, believe it or not. And in some cases, as I said, I did deal with some cases of children abuse, and you'd be shocked. The majority of them that I dealt with are mothers abusing their children, and fathers not liking it, but not being able to do anything about it. Simply because if they do, they'd be considered people that, oh, I'm abusing my wife, or even trying to prevent harm on their own children. Even when it comes to something as simple as discussing personal problems in front of children, that's abuse. That is not right. The biggest issue that we suffer from sometimes is when the two fight in front of the children and they start calling each other names and accusing each other of something that's even false sometimes. Yet, according to the child, it's not false. The child is not going to remember that my father accused my mother of something wrong. Or let's say, for example, this thing was, no, they're going to remember that this is what my dad said to mommy. This is what happens in the case, you know what I mean? So these are some certain cases. The second top most common cases that I personally dealt with are women, mainly women who are religious, who get abused in public, and at work, within the community, from their friends, simply for wearing a hijab. That's something that is very common. Even in the most modern world that claims to have a list of human rights, you find a lot of women, many comments are being thrown at them simply for wearing a hijab. Some of them are comments, but hidden, that a lot of them they contain hidden messages. You know what I mean? That even they are a form of verbal abuse. And believe it or not, the majority of these women do not get abused by other men. The majority of these women get abused by other women. If you look at the statistics, is that the majority of them, they get abused by other women. And sometimes those other women are not only non-Muslim. Some of them are either Muslim or Muslim but non-religious. For example, there's a lot of cases that you find many girls and many women complain from other women who are non-religious complaining about their hijab as to why do you wear your hijab this way? Again, I'm speaking about my own personal experience. As why do you wear your hijab this way? Why do you insist on wearing the abaya? Let's say, for example, or why do you want to wear this? Or why don't you style your hijab more? So you're talking about there's two categories: Muslim women that are non-religious or non-Muslim, or even Muslim women that do wear the hijab, but it's more stylish and they want other Muslim women or their friends to wear their hijab. A lot of these girls, trust me, you would be shocked. A lot of their friends decide not to hang around with them. A lot of their friends feel very ashamed to even have them around, or even have them around in public. Many of these women, a lot of men, unfortunately, foolish men in our community, do not want to marry, simply because they do not feel that they're revealing enough. They do not fit into their lifestyle. I've dealt with certain divorce cases where a man wanted to divorce his wife simply because she's too chaste, or she applies bashfulness to its best. She's too pure, she's too good.
In public, like
Yes,
hijab was.
yes, yeah. Maulana, I don't like, look at the hijab she wears. I can't take her out with me. Well, imagine, yes.
Do you get the opposite of women being abused because they took off their hijab?
In what sense? What do you mean?
Like a woman that took off her hijab, they decided that it's not her, it doesn't suit with her.
Okay.
Or for any other reason, and
Okay.
are abused,
Yeah.
for example. Do you hear of
I wouldn't be surprised that it does happen. I personally didn't see that. In fact, what I realized is that the majority there's many posts on Facebook of people that I know, and people that I know on a personal level, they did decide to take up their hijab, and in reality, they're the ones who ended up abusing other people and calling them that, you know what, you manipulated me to wear the hijab, and now I'm happy that I took it up.
I
Take
mean,
it off.
women that take off their hijab, I mean, I personally had that experience. I took off my hijab and I was abused by a lot of people in the community
That can
for
happen.
taking it
Totally.
off.
That can happen. I personally didn't deal with anything like that in particular,
Yeah.
but I
And
did see, yeah.
I mean, I'm not the only one. It's a lot of, it's
It
a
happens.
huge
Yeah,
group
it does
of
happen.
people
It does
that
happen where you
happens
feel like
to.
you're outcasted, or you feel like, you know what, you did the wrong thing, or you know what I mean. But it depends the level of abuse in that sense. You know what I mean? On both sides, of course. What's the level of abuse of that sense? Meaning that yes, do I have the right to prevent someone from entering, I don't know, a community center simply because they decide to take out their hijab? You know, of course not. It's a place of worship. It's welcome to everyone. You know, but yeah, so just in general, I'm talking about my personal experience was simply with a lot of the girls that are religious, and they wear a hijab, and they get abused, they got bullied, they got called names on the street in public. You know, even sometimes, as I said, from their own friends and relatives and family members. So these are the most common cases that I personally dealt with. I'm sure there are others. There's many others, but these are the ones that I dealt with in particular. Thank you.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So very similar to what Brother Wael said. In fact, we've worked on cases together as well. So in terms of relationships, I see more laughter back there. We're a small community, and alhamdulillah, we get a chance to work with each other, consult, and it's good that we're utilizing the professional expertise that we have in the community. And the sad thing is that we do come across cases that are similar in terms of the nature of them. So relationships is one of the biggest issues that I also deal with in my office, but also outside of the office, where I get phone calls, and wherever I go to each community, people come up to me and talk to me about the struggles that they're encountering. So relationships could be, you know, sorry to say it, but we do have this in our community. Boyfriend, girlfriend, people do have that. Or people getting to know each other for marriage. We have people who are officially engaged, people who are married, and even after separation and divorce, there are issues as well. So there's also, you know, cases where there are children involved as well. I don't deal with minors, meaning 16 and under, but I will have people who will come in, because I deal mostly with university age students, and so they will talk to me about, let's say, if there's abuse in the home, if there's a minor. Now, in this profession, both Sister Fairuz and I, we are legally obligated to report this to the Children's Aid Society if there is a minor that is exposed to abuse or is being abused themselves. So sometimes people refrain from saying certain things because we do have that legal liability to do that. Also, I do deal with a lot of cases of women as well as men who do get sexually assaulted. Mostly it is women, because when it comes to abuse, and including sexual abuse, it is underreported when it comes to men. But we hear from Brother Wael, he gets a lot of the calls from the men when there's abuse. I do get them in my office as well, but statistically, it is the women that will report more than the men, and this goes with the social stigma around.
Well, as
that.
I said, sorry to cut you off,
Yeah.
I've dealt with both,
Yeah.
and it's a lot to the point. But yes, there are many cases that, as I said, is that when you realize that it actually goes both ways too. This is
Yeah.
the shocking part, that sometimes and even to the point that where it's actually physical in the sense.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's almost as if, you know, it goes both ways. Sometimes.
Absolutely. I recall cases where a young woman was talking about anger management, and she went on with her story. I'm going to be very anonymous and not much detailed here because we have to keep our stories anonymous. But long story short, she admitted when she came back another time that she would physically hit her partner, and she didn't feel it was anything, that it was okay to do that. She didn't find that abuse, but I'm a woman. And I guess being female, she expected sympathy from me and what. I'm like, but abuse is abuse, no matter if you're a male or a female. So it does happen, unfortunately, but we don't talk much about the fact that men do also get abused. I deal with Islamophobic cases, so almost the opposite of what you deal with. I do have some young women who are afraid of, because of their physical hijab out in the community, they're afraid of how people are going to react to them. But I've also had a lot of young women where they're thinking of taking off their hijab, they have taken it off, or they will take it off and put it back on depending where they are. And so there's a lot of issues involved there. I always go back to the root. What caused you to take it off to begin with? What's happening at home? What is your understanding of the veil? Why did you put it on to begin with, and why do you feel you have to take it off
Or
now?
what's happening even in public that actually forced you, or you felt that you will fit in more to take it off.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, I mean, I personally, with my own personal experience, you find that there's a lot of girls who decide to take off their hijab, and I say, well, did you take it off just simply because you're convinced? And it's always the reasons, some majority of them, I'm not saying all of them, but the majority of the reasons end up being external reasons. You know what I'm trying
What
to
do
say?
you mean external?
Exactly the point, meaning something that affected them, influenced them to take up their hijab. It's not because they're convinced totally. And again, some of them, some reasons are internal, meaning that they never really understood the concept of it. They didn't get the proper meaning of it, the proper education about it, and therefore they decided to take it off. But again, it always goes back to the same very general meaning, is that I feel more good, I fit more, I feel that I'm more accepted. You know what I mean?
Because of the way that I look.
And again, I can totally sympathize with that as a person that goes around and when you interact with the society outside of public.
That could be hard, yeah. Just to finish off here, when it comes to different cases of abuse, recently we've seen more and more young women come out speaking about spiritual or religious abuse, and what that is loosely defined as is people who are in positions of authority at a religious level, so whether they're priests or sheikhs in our community, where they have power dynamics in terms of sexual abuse or mental abuse. And so there's been a lot of that, unfortunately, and there's a lot going on about that. We see it on social media. And this also goes along the lines of where a lot of these religious figures have, when it comes to divorce cases, will have withhold divorces. And so that's another form of abuse. And it's a very sensitive topic because it's obviously a case by case by case
Yeah, it's abuse of
scenario.
leadership, in fact.
Pardon me?
It's abuse of leadership.
It's
Or
abuse of
abuse
leadership.
of authority.
But what
authority
happens
to have,
though?
yeah.
But what happens?
In what sense?
Well, these people who are in positions of authority, right? They happen to be religious authorities.
Oh.
So what happens to their image? When they are withholding, when they're being paid off not to give divorces, when they are themselves inflicting sexual abuse, they're bringing such a horrible image to Islam
Yep.
and destroying whatever faith this woman had put in this authority figure to save her, to help her, because this is the first point of contact when it comes to these kind of scenarios or issues, right? You'll go to the chef and the authority figure who just happen, to be with the family of the other partner, being paid off not to give the divorce for whatever reason and not helping supporting. So what happens to this woman? If she's not a person of strong faith to begin with, and I'm speaking from experience from what I've seen in the community, what happens? If she's somebody who wears the hijab, suddenly you'll see her without hijab anymore, right? Or she will disclose she's no longer praying anymore, she's not spiritual or religious anymore. She will suddenly leave the faith. I'm no longer Muslim. I've had sheikhs consult with me and say this woman has decided she's no longer a Muslim and she's having relationships outside even though she's not officially divorced. And so the sheikh would say, you know what? This is not her fault. The responsibility is not on her, it's on the sheikh who did not help her. And those people who did not. It's not me saying
I really
this
think
is-
that the sheikh shares a bit of responsibility. If I may say, let me give you an example.
No, I'm not saying this sheikh.
Yeah, no, I know.
I'm
No,
saying
it's
he's-
true.
he's trying
It's
to help the
unfortunate.
scenario,
Corruption
right?
does exist in total and on
Absolutely.
all levels. But my question is that, let's say, for example, there's a lot of partners that do go to the Canadian courts. And it's funny because, and I'm sorry if I'm taking a bit of your
No,
time,
that's
but
fine.
because
It's
it's
a
a very
discussion.
interesting topic in that sense, is that number one, you realize that sometimes what you get at the Canadian court, for instance, if you go right now to court, is that they do push that whole notion of fairness, right? Meaning everything has to be split in half, right? Right? Am I right or wrong?
Equalization.
So let's say, for example, I'm married, and my wife, regardless who bought what, everything is going to be split in half, right? Is that fair?
No.
What's that? That's fair, but it's not just.
Right.
And there's a difference between fairness and justice. I'll tell you why. I dealt with a case personally. It was a case of divorce, and it's unfortunate. To me, I knew the family of the girl. The girl was a gem, totally gem. Literally, there isn't anything that a man would not want in a woman as a wife that is not present in that gem. She got married, brought her husband. Her parents bought her the house. They paid it off. They don't even need to pay mortgage. She provided him with everything. His birthday, she brings him a car. She paid for everything. Unfortunately, he ended up being a very bad person. I'm glad that she divorced him. But again, she didn't get her full rights because when they went to the Canadian court, they had to split everything in half.
That's
Islam Islam does not do that. When it comes to the religion of Islam, is that the religion of Islam is keen about giving the right where the right is due. Meaning if I paid for the house, then I get the house. If you paid for the car, then you get the car. This girl in particular was oppressed.